So I feel like we just witnessed one of the greatest marketing moves in history and one of the worst marketing moves in history happen at the same time from two competing companies. And I've got to say, like, this has to be a once in a lifetime moment. So, of course, we're talking about it. We are talking today about the Jaguar rebrand or the Jaguar rebrand, as well as the Volvo movie. Now, you've probably seen both if you're in this industry. Just in the interest of a quick recap, so Jaguar recently released their rebrand, and they've changed their logo, they've changed their font, they've changed their overall style, their brand messaging, and it has not been received well. That is an understatement. It has not been received very well at all by marketers, by customers, by pretty much anybody. And one of the things that makes this so interesting is that Jaguar, historically, it's a legacy brand. We all know it. We all recognize the little Jaguar icon. It's a car that people used to desire and people used to look up to alongside the Mercedes and the BMWs. It's a luxury. Over the years, we've noticed that they're just talked about less. Like, they're less culturally relevant. And so their goal with this rebrand was to try and inject themselves in the culture again, inject themselves in the conversation. But, and we're going to get into sort of my view on why this failed so badly, but the high level analysis is essentially it was selfish. It was a rebrand coming from what they wanted and what their internal people said looked good. And maybe they ran some surveys, maybe they ran some competitive analysis, maybe they just looked at the trends in the overall industry, but it wasn't very inspired. Now, compare that to Volvo. You've probably seen this as well. They recently released a commercial that I will refer to as a movie going forward, because this thing hits all the points it needed to hit in order to have the impact they were trying to have. And they also did this in a way that, quite honestly, and I've seen this amongst brand marketers since its release, most people would not have approved, because it goes against everything that we've been told should work on social and should work in sort of modern advertising. It's not very product centric. There's no fast editing or hooks. It's not eye catching in the way that car commercials typically are. It is a movie. Like, it feels like a scene from something you might see in theaters. And what's fascinating was that it worked really well. The target community for this ad have been responding. And they've been saying that, hey, Volvo's a consideration now. So let's break into why Volvo worked and why Jaguar did not. And what it comes down to in my mind is a focus on the community they're trying to serve. So Jaguar, as I said earlier, they made a redesign based on what seems to me, I obviously was not in the room, but seems to me like their own whims and what competitors were doing, what the larger market were doing. Somebody internally decided that in order to reinvigorate the brand, they had to change what had been working up to that point. And they looked at the branding that they already had. They looked at the logo, the color scheme, the language, all of these things felt like, oh, it's dated compared to what the market is currently seeing. So we need to make a change. Now, the big mistake here is that people who would buy Jaguars aren't necessarily looking for what the market is doing. They're not necessarily looking for what is already out there, what's already happening. A big part of why people make a luxury purchase is to have something that most people cannot have. And as a result, your brand needs to feel unique and self-contained. It needs to feel like something that is standing out from everything else in the market. Now compare that to Volvo's commercial, right? So they, in my opinion, understood the community that they wanted to connect with. And what I mean by that is, so the ad, if you didn't see it, it focuses on a man and a woman, their partners. The woman announces that she is pregnant, and then the rest of the ad is focused on the conversation that the man is having with his mother and all the hopes that he's looking forward to and all of these things. Meanwhile, the woman is going around town doing her chores and almost gets hit by a car. Now, they understood the community. They understood that this group of people, expecting parents, people trying to become parents, people who are parents, recognize the dangers that exist outside of your own doors. They recognize that a single moment completely outside of your control can fundamentally change the entire direction of your life. And so the story that they told was one of laying out the life that could have been. The child getting married, falling in love, being there for them, helping them grow up, being there when they are older, being a part of this family. They show all of this. And then they do an interesting thing, and I don't want to get too deep into the creative analysis of this, but as we get closer and closer to the incident, as we get closer and closer to the tension building, the car is about to hit this expecting mother, you start to notice that the camera is showing the scenes of what the life could look like, but they're pulling back. They're zooming out. And they're doing this in this subtle way of saying, like, this moment that's about to occur is going to erase all of this potential. And then we cut to the Volvo stopping in time. Now, I don't know a better way of selling the idea that your brakes are better than everyone else's. Like, if you know one, please let me know what it is. Whatever creative agency, whatever marketers internally were in charge of this, hats off to you. Chef's kiss. This is branding and marketing done perfectly. But what is interesting, if we really dig into what made this work, yes, the story was good. Yes, the cinematography was good. Yes, the creative choices they made was good. But it fundamentally came down to playing on a fear of the community they're trying to serve. They recognized and they were a part of that community, and they understood what was important to them. And then they told that story and how Volvo plays a part in creating the outcome they actually want. That's beautiful. That is inspired compared to Jaguar, who did this whole rebrand and dove deep into what I call soulless marketing. Now, this concept, soulless marketing, in my opinion, it started from the shift between MySpace and Facebook. Now, I know this is going to sound like it's left field, but stick with me for a moment. If you remember back in the early 2000s when we were all on MySpace, or at least my generation was, I was in high school at the time, you had the ability to customize your page, to really build something that felt like you, to communicate your unique self to the web, and even down to the point of ranking who was your best friend and not. You could really, in a minute way, tell the world who you are as a person. When Facebook started to take over, we saw a shift from full customizability and uniqueness to standardized template. And profiles became the same across the board. There was no longer a real way to communicate who you were or what you stood for or what was important to you or what made you different from this other person. When that shift was made, we actually started to see that more and more websites, more and more companies started to follow that same shift. The branding, the messaging, all of it shifted towards this idea that sameness was important, that we needed to fit in to the larger competition and what was out there in the world, because that's what consumers were expecting. And what it's led to is this really sad reality where brands want to be seen, but they're too scared to stand out. Let me repeat that. Brands want to be seen, but they're too scared to stand out. We see this in their brand messaging. We see this in their positioning. Every single brand understands the value of identity in marketing today. But they're all speaking somehow to the same exact identity, as though that's the only person that exists. Let me ask you this. With the broad range of identities and personalities and subcultures and fandoms that exist in the world today, with the ability to go deeper and deeper into those communities, why is it that every single brand feels exactly the same? Like, why is everything so bland and boring? The answer, in my opinion, is because they're all speaking to the same identity, this weird amorphous blob of a person that, quite frankly, doesn't exist. And that's what Jaguar tried to do as well. They tried to abandon what made them unique and interesting and move towards what was quote-unquote modern. And that modern look is one of boring, bland, uninspired work. And this all goes back to something I call the curse of enterprise. See, if you are a big legacy brand or you're a marketer at a big legacy brand, you are already established. You are going to get X number of sales every year just because people know who you are and they associate you with the product that you sell. So when new customers are looking for a thing, they tend to be biased towards the names that they recognize. And if you are a legacy brand, you're going to have an advantage in that. As a result, your direct work as a brand marketer is far more important for the future of the brand and what's going to be relevant in 5, 10, 15, 20 years than it is for driving sales and impact today. Now, of course, we measure impact and relevance today, but the work you are doing has, in my view, very slight value for actually moving the needle in the current day and age. We're getting measured as brand marketers on the perception of impact and relevance rather than on the reality of it. We do campaigns in a certain way because it feels like this is going to matter. We use big name celebrities and big name influencers, not based on will this actually move the needle, but based on is this going to allow us to be perceived in a certain type of way. But what we're forgetting is that all of that is forgotten almost immediately, and that every brand is working with those exact same big name influencers and big name celebrities. And so while it feels really good to say, hey, I got this huge name to do this campaign and it will cost this amount and yeah, we're all clapping, it's amazing, right? It feels great. Does it actually move the needle in terms of how the brand represents the customers that it's trying to serve? In the short term, it looks amazing. In the long term, the brand is creating an opportunity to be disrupted. And that's where we see opportunities like the Volvo movie come into play. Because if other brands were already doing this type of marketing to announce their new cars, it wouldn't have worked for Volvo, and they would have to find a different way to break through. But because they understood the problems that their communities that they're trying to reach are dealing with, because they were willing to do something that actually spoke to that community directly and showed them that they understand it, their marketing campaign is probably going to go down in history as one that the textbooks say we should emulate. Versus Jaguar, the rebrand, it flopped. Now, that isn't to say that the rest of the brand marketing initiatives that they're going to roll out won't work. They still can if they lean into a community-driven approach to reaching the people they want to reach. Now, of course, that isn't to say that the future endeavors that Jaguar gets into, the future marketing campaigns, the future brand campaigns, that they're not going to work. Of course, they can, but from my perspective, only if they actually lean into the community of people they're trying to serve and recognize what that community wants and what really matters to them, rather than creating the same thing that every single brand does and it's essentially sterilizing their own brand uniqueness. Now, I want to get into a few things that I think can actually help solve this going forward, meaning as you and your team are dealing with, should we rebrand, what type of ad should we put out, all of that stuff, like how you can navigate this kind of tricky situation and end up more like a Volvo and less like a Jaguar. And the first big thing is that you got to really lean into identity marketing. Now, we all understand that identity matters in marketing. We recognize that most of our brands and our products, people buy them because it says something about themselves. It communicates something to the people around them. And so social status and social identity is an important part of buying. But I think we take this for granted. I think we underestimate how valuable an identity is. And more importantly, I think we underestimate how many identities a person has. Because realistically, not only are there an incredibly varied number of identities in the world, a number of communities in the world, but each individual person also has multiple identities depending on the context that you are reaching them in. And if you are a global brand, if you are a major brand that is trying to be top of mind at all times with your target customer, then one of the things you need to consider is how are we reaching them outside of the main context that we are setting ourselves up for? Now, here's what I mean. If you understand your customer in one context, let's say you're trying to reach them in school, and they're a student, they're interested in this like range of things within the context of their identity as a student. One of the things you also need to consider is, who are they over summer break? Who are they over winter break? Who are they after class, before class? Who are they on a Friday night or a Saturday night? All of those different versions of themselves are different identities that if you really want to have an omni-channel approach to reaching these customers, you need to consider. And the best way to consider them is to recognize that, one, they exist, and two, understand the subcultures and fan communities that these other identities are a part of. Because if that student outside of the classroom is a huge fan of anime, or they're a gamer, or they're interested in cars, or they like cigars, or whatever their thing is, if you can speak to them outside of the classroom in that language, in the way that they want to be spoken to, you are going to find a place in their heart and their mind that most brands would kill to get into. And the way you do that is, yes, acknowledge the main identity that you're trying to speak to, the student, but also recognize that fully formed person is also a part of subcultures. They're also a part of fan communities. They have other identities that are just as valuable to speak to. If you can do that, then you end up making the Volvo movie. Then you end up understanding deeply what matters to this person. What are their fears? What are their hopes? What is it that they're trying to do? And how does your product fit into it? Rather than just chasing the pack and producing something like what Jaguar did. And with that, I'll talk to you in the next one.